Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by John Howard. He served as Liberal Party Prime Minister of Australia from 1996 to 2007. He's the second longest-serving Australian Prime Minister in history. John, lovely to see you. You're over for this ARC conference.
I am.
Which we're going to be speaking about, freedom of speech and
and also
policies.
a defence of the achievements of Western civilisation.
Well, we should champion them, shouldn't we?
We should always champion success.
Indeed so. Well, talking of success, you had a lot of success with your gun laws over in Australia. We've seen this horrific situation in Maine. The gunman has been found dead this morning, but at the same time, again, gun laws in America costing countless lives. Australia clamped down on this, and my understanding is you haven't had a mass shooting since. What could the US learn from the Australians?
Well, certainly our clampdown, which happened just after I became Prime Minister, and there was a mass shooting, 35 people killed by one madman in a remote area of Tasmania. We did something, and it had widespread community support, although it did cause a lot of opposition in certain rural areas because farmers legitimately had weapons as part of their daily work. It's easy from a distance to say the Americans should do this, that and the other. The history of that country is different. We didn't fight the British with arms to get our independence. They were happy to give it to us.
Yes.
And there's a different culture, but that having been said, I live in hope that our American friends will do something, but it will require enormous personal courage from an American president.
Indeed so. We were speaking just earlier, I don't know if you caught that debate, but I was talking about that horrific incident outside the Sydney Opera House where some protesters were calling for Jews to be gassed in the aftermath of the October the 7th attack. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people marching for Palestine on the streets of London at the weekend. There has been a suggestion, not least by our own Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, that multiculturalism has failed in the Western world. Do you agree with that analysis?
Well, separately from this issue, I have my doubts about multiculturalism. I believe that when you migrate to another country, you should, as far as reasonably, be expected to absorb the mainstream culture of that country. Sure, retain your affection for Greece or Italy or wherever you may have come from, and we've been very successful. I mean, I constantly meet people whose ancestors came to Australia from Greece and Italy and Germany and the Baltic countries immediately after, or more recently from China and India. The most widely spoken foreign language in Australia now is Chinese.
Yes.
There are 1.4 million Australians of Chinese heritage. Now, that all works well. It largely works well, I think, because people are attracted to the foundation mainstream culture of Australia, which is open and tolerant, but also very proud of what our country has achieved. And I think if we put more emphasis on what our nation has achieved and what the Western world has achieved, and we're less apologetic and less inclined to say, oh, we're all to blame, the better we would be.
Has the recent rise in anti-Semitism, not just in the UK, but also in Australia, surprised you, John?
In Australia, I don't find a lot of anti-Semitism. I really don't. And, I mean, the Jewish community is small, but very proudly Australian, and some of our greatest historical figures, without any doubt our greatest.
But you would have seen reports in the UK of the chanting of "From the River to the Sea."
Oh, look, we've had some absolutely unacceptable. I mean, that demonstration outside the Sydney Opera House was shameful. I mean, people saying "gas the Jews," and that was a deliberate invocation of the Holocaust, which was the most foul a deed in human history. 6 million people gassed to death because they were Jewish. Now, that is something that we should all be offended by. But having said all of that, I don't think the average Australian is anti-Semitic, and there are some anti-Semitic, just there are some who years ago were anti-Catholic or anti-Protestant. I mean, it's just... But I do think that this latest operation in the Middle East has brought out the double standards for a lot of the world. People have got to understand that the only way you will get lasting settlement in the Middle East is for there to be a full acceptance of Israel's right to exist behind secure, defensible boundaries. Now, until the entire Arab world does that, it's going to be very difficult, in my opinion, to see a lasting settlement.
What was your reaction to the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres' response to this conflict? He seemed to be taking sides.
Well, I don't think he contributed anything. I mean, in the long run, the only basis of a proper settlement is to have a genuine two-state solution.
Yeah, but how is that possible?
Well, it's not going to be possible just by the Secretary-General of the United Nations calling for it or calling for a ceasefire. We'd all love a ceasefire.
Yeah.
We'd all love violence to stop tomorrow, but that's not going to happen. And the latest element in this long-running saga was the terrible attack by Hamas on the 7th of October. Now, that happened, notwithstanding the desire of a lot of peaceful Palestinians, a lot of peaceful Israelis to live together in harmony. And until the reasons for that are rooted out and destroyed, it's going to happen again.
Is the UN fit for purpose, do you think?
Well, I don't think it is fit for purpose, but having said that, I think some of its agencies do good work. I think UNICEF does good work. I think the High Commission for Refugees does some good work, but I think it's sort of plenary ministrations, if I can call it that, often fall well short of the mark.
If you were still PM, what would you be saying to Netanyahu right now?
Well, I would be expressing the strong, unqualified support of the Australian people for the right of Israel to respond with effective military force for what has been a heinous attack on its people.
Let's move over to matters in Australia. I was interested by all of the coverage of the no vote when it came to the Aboriginal voice debate. Was it important that the no vote won?
Well, I thought it was the right outcome. It was a very strong vote. I think it largely happened because deep down Australians recognise that we have a pretty stable, happy, successful, cohesive country. And when somebody comes along without explanation, without any strong argument, and says, we've got to alter the foundation document, we say to ourselves, hang on, what's he up to?
Yes.
What's this mean? There is in the Australian nature what I call a deep Celtic scepticism. We don't like people coming along and say, I'll do this and the world will be beautiful tomorrow.
Yeah.
Our reaction is, what's he want? What's he up to? We don't like this. And then I think, seriously, that lay behind part of this very strong vote.
I mean, it was a convincing vote for no.
Oh, very
Do you
convincing.
think that has a positive knock-on effect when it comes to pro-monarchy sympathies?
Oh, look, I don't think there'll be a vote on the monarchy for years.
Yeah?
I mean, there was one.
I mean, there's a minister for the Republic now that
well, I think
is
we
appointed.
could pension him off at a very early age.
Really?
I think so.
How would you judge the King's first year on the throne to have been?
Oh, look, I don't wish to be in any way patronising. I think he's done a wonderful job, but it's the system of government as much as the person of the monarch that matters. And I think we have seen in recent weeks and months, indeed, some of the difficulties in the United States of an alternative to the parliamentary system. And that's not to say you can't have a parliamentary system without a monarch. I have to acknowledge that intellectually, but I think the whole package comes together rather well. And I think the attitude of many Australians is, gee, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Now, give us some advice to Rishi Sunak. The Tories are in a bit of a pickle. They're 20 points behind. Pressure on the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, to cut taxes in the autumn statement. What advice would John Howard give this duo?
Well, look, I'm not falling for that. I've only met... I've only met Rishi once or twice. Look, I think he obviously faces a huge struggle. He knows that. He's a long way behind in the polls, and the Conservatives have been in power for a long time, and they've been through a few prime ministers recently.
That's right. Can he pull it round?
A big one?
Can he pull it around?
Well, anything's possible. I think one of the things you've got to learn about modern politics is that it's a lot more fluid. When I was first involved in politics, and I think it's true in Britain as it was in Australia, you had a sort of 40-40-20 rule. 40% always voted for the Labor Party, for the Socialists, the centre-left, whatever you call them, and 40% always voted for our side of politics, which of course in Australia is called Liberal, a bit different but Liberal here, and 20% moved around. I now think it's more like 30-30-40, and I think you've got a far more fluid situation, so he may look to be a long way behind.
Yeah.
He is a long way behind, he knows that, but he's doing things, he's responding, and...
You'll probably agree he has to stop the boats. Does he need to cut tax in the autumn?
Look, that is entirely a matter for his judgment.
But is it politically expedient to offer that?
Look, people always like paying less tax.
Yes.
But strangely enough, they like to have plenty of government services.
Yes.
And the art of government is putting those two things into balance.
So you would say to the Chancellor, what? Make it a bit more red-bloodedly right-wing?
I would say some things to him privately. Publicly, I would respect the difficult job that he has, just as when I was Tony Blair's opposite number. I was, in fact, the only Australian Prime Minister that Tony Blair ever dealt with. They were on different...
One final word, John. Who would you like to see get the Republican nomination? Trump or someone else?
I couldn't vote for Trump if I were an American, no.
So somebody else?
No, somebody else, because he wouldn't leave the field when he was given out.
Indeed so. John Howard, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
Thank you.